in the Centre for International Education, and she completed her PhD here. So a lot of us have known Eva for a long time, and I remember your very informative doctoral presentations where you talked about elite interviewing, and you used a lot of images to show the power relation within elite interviewing. Her doctoral thesis explored the discursive and social practices of those involved in pre-primary education in Benin within the decentralisation policy of 2010. She was also a temporary lecturer at the University of Münster in Germany. Eva's research interests extend from basic to higher education and include post-structural, post-colonial and intersectional theories, gender and identity, equity and inclusion, governance, globalization, democracy and power, and different approaches to teaching and learning. Before and during her research career, Eva has been an education and development advisor in the Global South context, notably West Africa and the South Caucasus. So we're very happy to have you here and looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jo, for this kind introduction, and thank you very much for being here. I'm very aware that studying at the university has been very disruptive, so I really appreciate your presence. So today, maybe you will expect me to talk about Foucault, but maybe you won't expect me to talk about sheep and sheep, shepherds, and pastoral forms of governance. So it's a metaphor I'm using, which has been accompanying my research since data collection, but I've never thought that one day I could possibly link it to Foucault. We will see how that goes today. So I will provide an introduction to governance and governmentality and how those relate to one another. And talk very briefly about the context of my research. I'm aware that some of you are familiar and I want to be too repetitive, but for others it's new. So it's located in Benin, West Africa. Yeah, and in terms of the findings, I mean, it's rather reflections. It's a different perspective, theoretical perspective on the data of my doctoral research. I will talk about pastoral governance and self-regulation or self-government. And then I will wrap up with some theoretical and substantive reflections and also some limitations and further questions. So I briefly want to talk about the genealogy of this talk, also how I came about to do this talk. I think, and I can acknowledge that, Barbara, you introduced me to this wonderful book from Youngblood and Marseille, looking from different post-structural theories on one set of data, I think 5 or 6 theorists, and basically showing how different theoretical lenses can show us or can shed light on very different aspects of one data set. And those who know me from before know that I have this curiosity of playing around with different theoretical perspectives. Another important experience since I've left Sussex was my time as a research fellow and then a lecturer at the University of Münster, where we had one one term. I mean, we had a research colloquium for one term about governmentality and subjectivity. And that's when I thought, oh, I believe it goes quite nicely together with looking at issues of governance. And also Karin Amos' work, she's at the University of Tübingen, and she looked extensively into the relationship between governance and governmentality. So her work will inform my talk today. Yeah, and the last one, which will or may make you smile, is the sheet metaphor from data collection. So I collected my data in 2017, and research participants, not only one, but several, gave me this beautiful proverb of, you gave me a sheet, but you have kept the rope, to talk about decentralization. And at that time, I took it quite literal. Now I try to link it back to pastoral forms of governance and power. So, I mean, I won't explain the history of governance reforms. We are all aware that they are a highly discussed issue, and they have been, the debate has been accelerated through, for example, the good governance agenda, the Washington consensus in the 1990s. Maybe, so there is a whole bunch of literature around that there is a move from government to governance because the boundaries become blurred, and we rather talk about, as Mundi does it, that we need to study education systems within a wider web of global governance issues and not within, bounded to nation states. The concept of governance comes from sociology and political science, and there are rather narrow or broad definitions of governance. I'm using the definition of Karin Amos, who says it's to designate the ensemble of measures to assert an educational quality in schools. Basically, it's about different actors, different levels, and how things get operationalized in a very functional perspective on governance. And in particular, so characteristics are school autonomy, and in Benini's case and many other cases, we have it through this decentralizing education. We have it through the introduction of educational standards, and Benin is no exception to that with the EQF standards, and then the inclusion of new actors such as, international organizations. They are not new as such, but they are very important players in education policy and education governance. I will stop here to talk about governance and rather talk about governmentality and what is my understanding and how I believe that it could be productive to look at education governance. So Foucault understands government not as limited to political governance of the state, but rather governing others. So in French, it would be gouvernement des autres in relation to self-governance. So le gouvernement de soi. So it's the connecting point between power and subjectivity. So government means always governing people, going back to the Christian conception of the relation between the shepherd and the fold. So the aim of pastoral power in the past was to save souls, and this has been shifted into the modern state, moving from governing souls to political governance, and like governing like health, security, and so on. There are three aspects highlighting the Foucauldian perspective. So to de-ontologize the state. So the state is seen as a correlate of social practices. Technology in relation to governance. So, for example, how forms of subjectivity, lifestyles, and gender regimes are practically produced. And then the state as an effect, instrument, and field of political strategies. So, in Foucault's conception, the state remains central, but he is interested in theorizing the state. And as I already said previously, there are three modes of governance. So the art to govern oneself with morality, to govern the family with economy, and to govern the state with politics. There is a correspondence between the shaping of subjectivities and the modern state. And there are individualizing and totalizing technologies. So Foucault focuses on the analysis of governing techniques as he considers the society as the effect of social practice of technologies of governing. I will very briefly talk about pastoral governance because that's quite, I believe, quite important for my research. So if we talk about pastoral forms of governance, we could talk about the pastor as the shepherd and the community as his flock. It's not, the literature says it's not about disciplining the body, but the steering of the soul. I would say that it's both. Yeah, and as modern power structures are simultaneously individualizing and totalizing, the state is a union between pastoral power and political power. It is not, and that's important for my talk today, it's not helpful to differentiate the subject from the state, but rather to see how both co-constitute each other. So that's why we should ask how power relations are rationalized and have their origins in the political rationality themselves. So that was quite theoretical, but I will come very, in a moment to the background of the study. I won't go into detail of this slide. Some of you may be familiar with it. So even though, what is interesting, what is my sense, and I'd like to hear back from you, but during my PhD, I try to understand how Foucault conceptualizes power. So I feel power is a very important theme in education debates here. I don't know in the I don't know if I can say in the Anglophone academic world or not. And then when I moved back to Germany, to academia, they focus very much on the idea or the concept of governmentality. And obviously we cannot look at one concept without looking at the other concept, but I was wondering if you yeah, if you would agree that there is maybe a stronger emphasis on Foucault's ideas of knowledge and power as compared to governmentality studies. Still, I'd like very briefly to talk about power before we come to the background of the study. Power is important insofar as it is inherently involved in decentralization and education policy anyway. Yeah, and from a Foucauldian perspective, I understand power as relational, productive, normative, and power relations as dynamic and multi-directional, fluid and potentially changeable. And I think Foucault's work can help to understand how the social operates through techniques of discipline and regulation. And there is not, at least to my knowledge, there is not so much literature on education decentralization using a Foucauldian approach, but there is, for example, Berghout, who did a comparative study between South Africa and Belgium using Foucault. And she said, so if we are using the Foucauldian approach to power, it helps to go beyond the practice of policy gap and the binary understanding of decentralization, re-centralization, because power manifests itself in relationships and networks. Okay. So I thought instead of presenting a map from West Africa, I will use one of my paintings. It's an abstract painting. It doesn't represent, obviously it doesn't represent the world, but maybe it also stands for, yeah, for the blurring of boundaries. And I painted it at a time when I explored how Benin shifted from a Marxist-Leninist orientation towards a liberal democracy with the end of the Cold War and the changing geopolitical relations. So, but today I'm still going to talk about Benin, which is a rather small country in West Africa, with a long colonial history. So Benin's history can be categorized into three categories: pre-colonial rule until 1890s, then colonial rule until 1960, and then the post-war era of decolonization from the 1960s onwards. I won't talk about the colonial implications today. I did it in other papers, like at the base conference last year, and there will hopefully be upcoming a paper very soon on the colonial legacy of the decentralization policy. So what is important today is to understand the emergence, how education decentralization came onto the Beninese agenda. And as I already mentioned, Benin moved to a liberal democracy in 1990. And then in the 90s, obviously with the support of international organizations, they developed, so it's anchored in the constitution. Then they developed the decentralization laws and adopted the decentralization policy in 2010. So what does it mean, the decentralization policy? It's it's very simple. It means that one main responsibility is transferred to the municipality, which is school construction. And I think, we don't need to know more about that. So also, although my talk goes beyond the classical instruments of sovereignty, which are laws, orders, and regulations, I will still explain a little bit more in detail the legal and policy framework, because in the second part of the presentation, I want to focus on the effects of those and yeah, discuss what it makes with the education subjects. So yeah, here we have a small excerpt from the Vietnamese government, so basically the institutions which are relevant for the study. These are basically all actors I interviewed. I would say the main actors are the Ministry of Preschool and Primary Education to the school level. This one are deconcentrated actors, so they are still depending on the national level. And then we have one, let's say, decentralized or devolved level, which is the municipality. Here we go. And so the municipality has a legal personality and financial autonomy. So in theory, they should be independent from the rest. And then we have the prefecture at a medium level. And I will talk a lot about the relationship between the two, because the prefect is basically a representative from the head of state at the regional level. And according to the decentralization law, he advises or supervises rather and controls whatever the mayor is doing here. So, yeah, Joe, you mentioned my illustrations. I never got it out. Yeah, but I'm still using it today. So it's a friend of mine who did the illustration. It's just one among others to illustrate different interview situations and how power relations are negotiated. So as I already said, my talk is based on my doctoral thesis, which was a qualitatively oriented in-depth study about how policies generated and mediated. And the data collection, I did the data collection in 2017 with the different ministries you've just seen on the previous slide. And I also did focus groups with head teachers, parents, and members of teacher unions in 2 different field sites in Benin. And overall, I interviewed 80 research participants. So I wouldn't do that again. But
80.
Yeah.
You have about another 12 minutes.
Okay.
Just to let you know time-wise.
Okay, thanks. So today I want to explore to what extent a governmentality approach can help explain the issues underlying the discourse and performance of local actors enacting the education decentralization policy in Benin. And here we go, come to the findings. So I was reflecting, I'm still doing a lot of free writing, and as I said, this theme of the sheep and indirectly of the shepherd came up during data collection, and I was wondering during my free writing. So the prefect is the shepherd, and who are his sheep? 12 prefects, shepherd for 77 mayors or sheep, or much more. How many schools are there in Benin? How many teachers and how many students? The potential to discipline souls and bodies is enormous. So I give you a minute to read the quote from a teacher union member.
Perhaps you can read it aloud, because it's a little small.
Yeah, I can do that. So if the governor is not in agreement with the mayor, he can block his or her actions and prevent him from working since politically, if the mayor is not on the same side as the president of the republic, but the governor is, the mayor can easily be defeated and his place taken by someone else. So, yeah, it's one quote among others to frame the prefect as a shepherd and local education actors maybe as his foe. Then, as I said previously, it's not only about disciplining the body, but the steering of the soul. And we will have another quote. Yeah, that's maybe less visible. I will read it out as well. It's from someone working for a local town council, and I had only a few critical voices from the town council, and that's something I think is really interesting, because for me it's a form of self-government or self-governance that they in a way adjust or perform a particular kind of subjectivity which makes them work, or which helps them working through the structures. So the quote is as follows: the elected, that is to say the mayor, is given the possibility of bringing before the court questions about issues he's unclear about and that the governor favors merit to. And these courts can be, for example, the administrative chamber of the Supreme Court. However, no mayor has ever assigned a governor to the court for the peaceful resolution of various situations. So I won't read the whole quote, but basically what it says, even if a mayor could bring a prefect to the court, they would never do it because there are too many implications for them. Yeah, and this brings me to the second theme of the presentation. It's about self-regulation or self-government through, for example, strong accountability mechanisms. And here are two quotes from actors working for the town council. And obviously I know that, or I can never know what they would say towards another person in a different moment and so on. What I wanted to hear from them is that they are, I mean, as a researcher, we are never neutral, but I hope them to be critical in this moment. But it was the opposite. They performed a form of subjectivity, which, as I previously said, helped them to work through the governance structures. So those quotes basically say, no, it's not a problem at all that we are controlled by the state. We need this, etc. So I won't read those, if that's okay, to come to the conclusions. So basically what I try to do is to move from governance to subjectivity and to show how it's not opposite to each other, but rather how governance structures, processes, and the way how subjectivities are performed co-construct one another. So, for example, Karin Amos says, observation from outside quickly turns into self-observation. So what she means is, or if I say it in my own words, so if we have strong accountability mechanisms, the mayor is still accountable towards the prefect. It's also it also turns the observation or the gaze towards oneself into self-observation, and how how I perform as a subject. Self-regulation, or Jelig and Sali and Anderson also say that self-regulation tends to be replaced or developed into regulated and framed, if not controlled, self-regulation. I will move on, Joe, if that's okay.
Yeah, another 5 minutes.
Okay, good. I won't revisit the proverb you gave me, sheep, but you kept the row. And other than saying that during data collection, what I've understood at that time is that, you know, even though school construction was transferred to the municipal level, the national power or the national level still tries to hold on. Now I try to have another view. I wouldn't say deeper view, but another view. It's not about centralizing or decentralizing, but it's rather a amalgamation between, or between different moments or processes. So who, why, what? And it's not as neat as I will present it now. I'm very aware of that. But influenced by other literature using governmentality to their studies, I borrowed these questions. So in a nutshell, if I should say who or what is to be governed, I would say very broadly the population, but in particular maybe people at the local level. Why it's a counterbalancing of local power centers. So what do the various authorities want to happen? So they frame it as the local economy is weak, citizen participation is weak, but it's much more, so it's a particular form of rationalization or rationality, which is used to maybe negotiate this balance between freedom and security mechanisms. So what are the ends or objectives? So even though there are various discourses about transferring power, strengthening the local level, in practice, it's much more messy. And I think it has much more to do with self-disciplinary actions. So the findings suggest that while in theory, the discourse of transferring power was supposed to strengthen the local level, in practice, this discourse was about controlling the kind of power transferred to local communities, combined with severe accountability mechanisms as technological measurements of performativity. And I go back to Berghaut's argument and her analysis of decentralization. And I would argue that the Beninese decentralization reform is, and I quote her, an amalgamation of decentralization and concealed centralization measures, rather than a shift from the center to the periphery, which is often done from functional perspectives. Okay, here I try to contrast the strengths of governance, the concept of governance, and what governmentality can add to this. In a nutshell, I would say governance remains often a technical concept, very descriptive, even though it provides can also provide a multi-level perspective. And governmentality, its strength is to see power as a productive force. And I like very much the development in an article here in this very old journal, The Hidden Side of the Iceberg, from citing Paul Vane, saying that Foucault tries to make visible the invisible side of the iceberg. So the invisible or invisible side of the iceberg are the invisible practices, the thinking and acting, and how they construct the political. Yeah, maybe as one thing I'd like to explore more, I'm still wondering, why is it only, or why is it especially school infrastructure, which is decentralized, especially because I believe that the spatial of schools is a, like, how should I put it, an interesting way of especially disciplining bodies and souls. So that's something maybe I want to explore further, why decentralization puts so much emphasis on that, and how we can explore it further through a Foucauldian perspective. Yeah, and here are my references. So I know here are some people, have a long experience working with Foucault. So it's, for me, the first time that I thought through. So I really appreciate your critical reflections and contributions to help me think further through that, because I think there is so much potential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, thank you.